lot of time in Edinburgh. When I was in the Navy, our ship used to go to Edinburgh. So we went to Leith. And from Leith you had to take a bus or a car. Yeah. To get to Edinburgh. At one time, Weltonville had stores, post offices, and everything, right?
Yes, has a store again.
Your copy, ladies. And this has a very short cord.
One night when I got in the jail.
Then we made more of a disturbance because we got up and moved out of the kitchen. So she, I don't know. Well, we'll get it started now, we're done by the time the rain starts. No. You want me to bring a pitcher of water out? No.
I'm gonna take a few.
Fire company started.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit.
That was the Navy then.
We're gone.
That was gone.
We're gone, okay.
So what was your mother's maiden name?
Donaldson.
Donaldson. You're nice people, still. Nice everything.
Said yes. What was I thinking? I have lived in Tioga County all my life. My father has lived in Tioga County all his life. My grandmother on my father's side has lived in Tioga County, had lived in Tioga County all her life.
What are the names?
My grandmother was Flossie Goodnow. She married Charles Dutton from Nichols, the Dutton's grocery store, the local store that Jay Dutton ran. That was some of her stepchildren. And my father is Harvey Goodnow. My mother was Mary Jane Goodnow. She was a Donaldson, Jack and Mary Donaldson's daughter. They were from Nantigo, Pennsylvania, and moved up here, and they lived in Tioga County. My dad has lived here all his life. Yes. One of the, Charles Dutton, my grandmother's second husband's name was related to Jay Dutton.
So is Gary. Jay is Gary's uncle.
Okay. So my grandfather, my dad's father died when my dad was 11 years old in an accident in the woods, cutting trees. So she remarried and married Charles Dutton, and she lived to be 93, I believe. But all her life lived in Nichols, Lounsbury, Nichols area. And I graduated from the Weagle Free Academy in 1966 and got married in 67 and had a child in 1968, at which time, late 68, 69, we bought land in Weltonville on the lower Fairfield Road. Nobody but Connie and Michael Harback were the only people that lived on that road at that time. So I've lived in Weltonville for 40 years. But like I said, I moved there when I was 5. I have 3 children by my first husband, Thomas Scott, And my children, Michelle, Suzanne, and Tom Scott, all are married and out on their own. My second husband and I have been married for 27 years, and that's Steve Fedorowicz, or Fedorowicz, as Grandma would say. And in 1979, in 78, I started taking a first responder class, first aid first responder class, and in 1979 became an EMT and helped form the first responder unit at the Weltonville Fire Station, along with Jerry Natty Hover and many other people. We were some of the renegades in the county and the first to have female firefighters. So that's a little bit of history, which I'll touch on the fire company later. When he said, talk about Weltonville, Weltonville to me is a 16 square miles. That's the map of the Weltonville Fire District. We are the taxing district number 2 for the town of Candor. So we are a separate fire district, but we are part of the town of Candor, and it is distinguished by voting district number 2. In 1895, there was a post office in Weltonville. We had, at that time, 98 residents that received mail at the Weltonville post office. There was no delivery at the bottom of the road like we have now. You went to the post office and picked up your mail, but there was no railroad service or express service. The post office couldn't tell me when they closed that post office. They didn't really know. Kind of like the school. They had no idea, because our fire station was a school. They had no idea when the school closed over there either. In 1865, labor rate was $1.50 to $2 a day. And most of the farms, or many of the farms in our area, were considered starter farms or farmettes, 104 acres. You were completely self-sufficient. I've had the Seasons of Change book, and I bought the Candor book, and I have the Gazetteer. All of them barely touch on Weltonville, except to say, well, it's the eastern part of town of Candor, and it's mostly farming. That pretty much sums it up. It is mostly farming. In the 1940-45 time frame, the pipeline went through Weltonville, and it helped our population some when IBM came to the county in the mid-50s. IBM came into the county in the mid-50s, so that helped with population in Weltonville. And I have a map here with little indicators on it, which you can come up and look at. Item number 1 is, I've decided to go all the way down to the border of our district, which is on the corner of Blodgett Road and West Creek. That's the south end of the district. And that's where Francis Clark lived for as long as I can remember, as far back as I can remember. The next place going north is the Dunning Farm. He was on the Dunning Farm is on the corner of Park Settlement and West Creek. And Floyd Dunning and his predecessor father owned that area where the gravel pit has been. Those of you who've driven by there have seen the gravel pit. And the old farmhouse is still on Park Settlement, on our end of Park Settlement Road where the bridge is closed. And Floyd built a new house right on the corner of the property, and across the road from his house, his son Kurt built a nice house up on the hill. And as life played games with his life, he never lived in that house. He and his wife separated, and he moved. So he built this brand new, lovely home and never lived there. The house was built in the 60s sometime, but he never lived there. Fred Kellum, because Floyd Dunning had a mining permit, he had got grandfathered in and allowed Fred Kellum to mine or take gravel out of that gravel pit for several years. He didn't buy the gravel pit, but he worked it under Floyd's, mining permit until the late 70s. Okay, number 3 on my list up here is where just at the intersection on West Creek Road, at the bridge that puts you into the town of Candor itself, Ron Latier, Bob Petzel, and Art Frost, well, Ron Latier's still alive, but Bob Petzel and Art Frost owned the land that Oliver Long had on the east side of the road. They intended to sell housing lots there. They never wanted to sell large properties. They only wanted to sell lots and make a housing development. And that didn't work real well. However, Ace and Joyce Keeler, if some of these names sound familiar to you, Ace and Joyce Keeler bought the first property, that first lot on the east side of West Creek Road, just in the town of Candor. And they bought that in 1972. And then Guy N. built the second house on that lot, and that's the only 2 houses that have ever been built there. Across the road from them is a farmhouse that Ed Bruce used to own, and Ed Bruce's daughter just sold that house, and she has moved, and I don't know who the new owners are, but that Ed Bruce took that, one of his barns, and took it down, donated it to the Billings house. It's called the Herrick Barn, and that's over on the Bemmett Billings establishment on Route 38. Is that making sense to people?
Now, that was an old Herrick farm?
Yes.
Connie,
Yep.
before you go any further, you were talking about Oliver Long's place. Now, do you know anything about the family, the Turpinings that lived back in between them and the bridge?
No.
That was Fred Turpining, and I wondered if the girls were still living.
Not a clue. Not a clue.
The Turpinning name is familiar with West Creek, but I do not remember. I'm not 72 years old.
Well, I'm 87, and I went to school with the Turpining girls.
Okay.
So sometime between then and that.
Yeah.
I just wondered.
Yeah, and moving north on West Creek Road, now we're into the town of Candor, and we're moving north. We come to Bob Petzel's farm, barn, and the daughter, of course, Harriet, still lives in one of the houses there that Bob and Fred owned. Bob Petzel, his barn burned to the ground in 1965, and I remember that because I was graduating high school. It was a junior. It seems like it was summertime, but I remember being there. I was probably there with Tom. And Bob Petzel at one time manufactured ice cream and sold it there at that location. He also sold potatoes to have a cash crop from the farm there. And Harriet was supposed to get me some information, but that she just didn't have time.
The ice cream he produced was Valley Made.
See, we couldn't figure that. We couldn't figure that out. We thought maybe Purity, but we thought that was
Valley Made.
Valley Made. Okay.
And Bob ran for, as a lifelong resident of Weltonville, he ran for the GOP assembly race in 1964. He
Okay.
didn't make it, but he
ran.
ran.
Yeah. Okay, so now I went right to downtown, the intersection of Fairfield. What? Downtown Weltonville.
Absolutely.
The intersection of Fairfield Road and West Creek is downtown Weltonville. Downtown Weltonville. The general store was at that intersection, and it was started by the Blodgett family. Clay Blodgett started that. back in the early 40s. And we have a little calendar here, thanks to Sharon. And it says Clay Blodgett, General Merchandise, Weltonville,
You see the date on it?
1942. And then Ken and Pearl Mead ran that store for a very long time. Now the calendar here with Ken Mead's name on it says 1947. Okay? When I moved there, Ken and Pearl Mead were still running the store. And as the fire service was still in its infant stage, there was no 911 center. Because Ken and Pearl were there all the time, she ran the store when he worked, and they lived there in the back part of the store, so they were there all the time. They had a fire phone. Now, for those of you who should remember that, but if you're too young to remember that, at one time, you didn't have pagers, and I don't have mine on, but pagers and plectrons that people carried around, and you weren't dispatched from a 911 center. You called Nelson, or you called Ken Mead's house and said, you know, I've got a fire at Back West Creek Road and I need the fire company. And most of the people had party lines at that time, so if the phone rang, they would know that they'd pick it up because they wanted to see what was going on in the area. Even if it wasn't a fire, they liked to listen in. But when it was a fire, you know, the other people would already know it, and it was your job, if you got the second phone call, to call somebody else so that you spread the word by calling on the phone. And people responded to the fire company. So I know that they still had the fire phone there, and then Nelson Pratt took over the store and still did the fire phone. And that was it. Nelson Pratt owned the store after Ken and Pearl Mead, and that was from 1971 to 1981. After that, a very short period of time, a guy by the name of Terry Berry ran the store, and then Terry Barnum bought the store and ran it for several years, and his brother built the restaurant in the back and ran that for a few years. Now, the store, what used to be Ken Mead's store is closed. People live in that establishment. And what used to be the diner is now the store that Charles Struble just opened this last year and is trying to make a go of it. And as a side note, just because somebody told me this, I thought I'd make sure that everybody knew, and I don't think anybody's still alive to go back on. Ken Mead's son became crippled with polio.
Yes, I remember very well.
Became crippled with polio. He blamed the county fair, the Target County Fair, and Judge Turk blocked the money that he was supposed to get as a settlement. So Ken Mead never had any use for Judge Turk. There you go. That's the dirty of what.
Connie,
Yes.
can you back up a little bit?
Sure, hon.
You said the Blodgetts came there in the early 40s.
Mhm.
They were there in the middle, later 39, 30s.
Okay.
Because I used to drive my horse down there and put it up in a barn across the street and go over there, and I graduated in 39.
Okay. Now, I have the resident expert here. Where was the blacksmith shop?
I have no.
It's right next to the store.
That's, okay,
I know where the one in Weltonville was.
yeah.
The picture,
Okay,
the
the
picture
blacksmith
shows.
shop, that's what I have, is that the blacksmith shop was right next to the store, and there was some controversy over that, let's say. People remember the big bellows and the anvil indicating the blacksmith shop. Across the road, right at the T of West Creek and Fairfield, was a wagon shop. And some people had them reversed. Okay, but that's where the wagon shop was.
Can I ask you what your name was when you lived over there?
I was one of the Newman brats.
Oh,
One of the Newman brats from Newman Road.
okay,
She's gonna help me when I get to Newman Road.
okay.
Connie, can we
Yeah.
also back up when you were talking about Bob Petzel and things? The big yellow house where Harriet Petzel Marmillion now lives was owned by her uncle, Reverend Milton Petzel, and his wife, Roxine,
Okay.
and he was an ordained Methodist minister and was a United States retired naval chaplain. And Roxine was a national president of Delta Omicron International Music Fraternity and the national president for the Professional Panhellenic Association from the time that he retired and stuff, and then they moved to San Antonio, Texas. But they sponsored all kinds of music organizations there and had fraternity meetings, and there were people from all over the world there.
Okay. I'll need to get copies of those so that I can put the two together and make it make sense when I pass it on. Next to the wagon shop at the intersection of Fairfield and West Creek was the post office. Again, that was in 1865, there was a post office there. That is what is now where Bonita Atwell lives. But before that, Doris Castleberry, from the time I was living there, and then she sold it to a Nichols, an elderly lady by the name of Nichols lived there, and Clay Blodgett lived there at one time. And the abstract dates back to the 1700s when the Blodgetts owned it.
They also lived where Marilyn Carl Akins lived,
Yes.
the Blodgetts.
Yes. So next to, unfortunately back this way, south on West Creek, John and Helen Sherwood lived in the house next to the creek, next to Doolittle Creek there. And they had a community hall next to their house, and the hall burned down. And no one seemed to know when. I asked dozens of people when that community hall burned down, but nobody seemed to know when. But Marion Halver lived near there originally. And Colin, her husband, built the house across from Carl Espy's on West Creek for Marion after that community hall. Richard. After the house burned down, or after the community hall burned down. Wally Jarvis, I'll talk to him about when I talk about the Gunther farm, but Wally Jarvis started the trailer park, much to our dismay, in 1971-72 time frame, because that's when Gunther's bought the farm. So we know that pretty what is a true. And he owned that for a number of years, and it has traded hands just an amazing number of times. He did one nice thing when he numbered the trailers. And I've been in this EMS business for a long time, and now I'm the coordinator for the county, so I get a chance to go to all different kinds of calls all across the county. And when people set up trailer parks, they just number the trailers as they come in and park them wherever the lots are available, and it's really, really hard to find the house, the trailer number. Well, Wally Jarvis numbered the row next to the fire station 100. So the first trailer is 101, the second one is 102, and the second row is the 200 row. So you know if you get a call in at lot number 302, you know it's the third row from the fire station and it's the second trailer back. So it's really easy. So of all the things he did with putting that trailer park in there, he certainly did a good job in numbering it, because it's very, very easy to find people when you're attempting to get there to help them out. The only benefit is when there's a trailer fire, that's pretty easy to spot, so it doesn't matter what number they give you. Weltonville Fire Station. Oh, our fire station was formed in 1955, and all of this stuff is up here for you people to look at. Obviously, it's not, please don't take it away, but it is up here, and the history of the fire station is up here as well. It was formed in 1955 in September after we lost a barn. Even that was before my time. After the fire company lost a barn on back West Creek Road, Gift Peters barn, burned to the ground. The fire station remains in operation. It was started with a 1948 Brockway pumper that we bought from Newark Valley Fire. And up until 3 years ago, we still used it as a fire truck. We finally retired it, and it is now our parade truck. We had it, it's red, and it faded and faded and faded over time. So we had it repainted and relettered back to the original, and they take it to parades. We're trying to build a new fire station on the corner of West Creek and Bloor Mead Road.
Bloor.
Bloor. It says Bloor
It's
Mead.
not Bloor Mead Road,
She doesn't like the new name.
not Bloor Mead Road.
Tell the town.
It's staying just plain lower.
Prior to being a fire station, our building was a one-room schoolhouse, which, several kids in the area went to school there, but nobody seems to be able to tell me when they stopped holding school there. But once it wasn't a school anymore, it became, Town of Candor put a town truck there. And Ken Mead and George Brink worked there. So they could take care of town roads from the Town of Candor station at Weltonville. The only problem was the town supervisor came by one day and found the guys sleeping in the truck. So they closed the station. That did it. So he found them sleeping in the truck during the day, so they closed that portion of the Candor Highway. And in 1955, we bought the building from the town for $1. The yellow house next to the fire station going north on West Creek was built by the Sherwoods. From what I understand, it was built using nothing but recycled products. Everything that they built that house with was used supplies, including the nails. Ralph Torrey has been in downtown Weltonville, downtown Weltonville, since before I was. He was there when I moved there, and I have no idea when he moved there, but his farm used to be called the Helmbrook Homestead. Ralph worked at Coleman Farm Supply and was caretaker for Tioga Cemetery for years. All right, now I'll go to Bloor Road. Bloor Road. Although the new maps say Bloor Mead, but I won't argue with you.
We
Bloor-
changed it without permission.
They changed it without permission, okay. Bloor Road is the first road north of Weltonville to the east, and at one time had a one-lane wooden bridge that separates Candor on this side to Newark Valley on the other side. The bridge was replaced in 1974, so now we have a metal bridge there. Made life interesting getting across it because weight limits and whatever became an issue as trucks became bigger and delivery trucks and all of that. So in the 1920s, there was a creamery on the corner of Bloor and West Creek Road. They manufactured butter and processed milk. Milk Straight from Flemingville picked up milk that was produced in this area by the farmers, and so did Steve's father. Steve's father ran the milk run through Weltonville. Bert Moreland had an airstrip on the Bloor Road. He was a naval training pilot. He had a Piper Cub and a Stearman, a double-wing plane, and he gave lessons in his Stearman. He was known to fly West Creek Road on a Sunday morning upside down. What? Did you have something to ask? Are you tired of sitting?
Always.
I'm done?
No, no.
Cut me off?
You haven't even got out of downtown yet.
I know.
Gotta get uptown.
That's where the houses are close together.
There you go.
Yeah. Dr. Gregory was a physician in Owego until 1948 when he and his wife died in a plane crash in Ohio. He stored his plane at Burt Moreland's and flew out of there. There was a big barn on Bloor Road at some point just over the bridge, and that was, from my understanding, there was a wedding there, and they held the reception in the barn, which I gather was pretty routine at that time. And the folks left for their honeymoon. The hired man put the tractor back in the barn. It backfired, and they burned the barn down.
And the Bloor farm, they used to have barn dances.
I was getting there.
Okay.
Jeez. When they rebuilt it, they held barn dances there every Saturday night. Jerry Hover's mother played the piano, his father played the banjo, and Glenn Courtwright played the fiddle. Les Glisp was also involved, and so was Steve Race, people who all played instruments in the barn dances over there. And that opened in about the 1940s. The Gunther Farm. The Gunther Farm was purchased from Wally Jarvis, and not that Karen remembered or anything, but she knew exactly. May 15th, 1971, they purchased the farm from Wally Jarvis. They purchased 180 acres. And they know that was the same day that Nelson Pratt opened the store. So, prior to Jarvis's, Alex McClellick owned the farm from 1953 to 71. Bert Hines worked there, and he made $25 a week. And he was the richest kid in the area. There's some other stuff about the Gunther, who else owned it here? Somebody else owned the
Did
Gunther.
the Tiffany's have a
Tiffany.
farm?
Tiffany, oh yes, Doug Tiffany. I know I talked to him.
Tiffany's and Miller's.
Doug Tiffany owned part of, Tiffany owned the land before, and who did he tell me owned it before him? He lived on the Gunther farm, he lived in the Gunther farm from 1938 to 1945, and they bought it from Blodgett, and they sold it to McLennan. Am I saying that name right away? McKellen? Okay. But his father had owned 400 acres. The backside of the farm ran into Crane's Nest, which bordered Charlie Truman's land. Okay? Okay, now, moving north some more. Do you want me to, is everybody happy with me just babbling on here?
Sure.
Make any difference? I love you, sweetheart.
You know, do you allow him to come to all these meetings? Cy Courtwright, you folks may know him as Levere. We all affectionately refer to him as Cy Courtwright. Cy Courtwright bought the farms, again, going north on West Creek Road. He bought his farm in 1952 on West Creek Road, 287 acres, and Glenn, his brother, bought 240 acres. And his farm was on West Creek and back West Creek Road. And their farms border the Petzel farm. What?
Yeah, Irving's in there somewhere, wasn't it?
Irv is in there too, okay?
Levere was one of my special ones in 8th grade.
Ah.
Have you rode your horse down to see?
Yeah, maybe.
They were nice. They were a nice family.
Todd Spencer now owns the farm that Herb Peretta owned. And again, on West Creek Road, Todd bought only 300 acres. Herb had owned, when he bought his farm in 1968, he owned 800 acres. He sold 200 acres to his son Russ, which was, his farm was the Bolenta farm. And And she's saying, that's right, and there was a.
Reno's.
Reno
Reno.
owned it before Valenta.
That was my places.
Mhm.
Herb said he sold some of his property to city folks. The Courtrights were very predominant in the area. There was Irv Courtright, and I had Cornelius and Angelina, Joseph, Elton, all appeared on the resident rolls, along with, you know, the family has been in the area for a long, long time. Back West Creek Road, we have Charles Struble and the Struble family. And Charles Struble bought their farm at Back West Creek Road in the late 1800s. And he thought around 1898, he didn't dig out the abstract, but it was one of these, well, Grandpa was so old when he bought it, and he was this old when he died, and I think that should have been 1898. Parts of the farm still remain, part of the Strubles live on the farm, the original farm, and he knows that his grandfather bought the farm from Stobie. They owned it beforehand. And their farm was about 300 acres. So you're seeing as the times change, instead of these 104-acre farms that were meant to be self-sustaining, they're getting bigger farms so they can produce and sell stuff, as opposed to being self-sustaining. Hedges were the dividing or the line marking the end of one person's property and the beginning of another's, but now most of the hedges are gone, and that can create issues for folks. Some other interesting information, Lloyd Sines was a resident on Back West Creek Road. He was a state trapper for pelts, so he trapped and sold pelts.
He and Mrs. Struble, brother and sister.
Brother and sister. And Grandma Bean lived at the intersection of Elmer Hill and West Creek Road, and her husband Walt worked at the ladder factory until he retired, and Beatrice Bean was a Struble. Yeah, a Sines, excuse me, was a Sines, and she raised many of the neighborhood children, and that's how she affectionately got called Grandma Bean.
Connie, you mentioned Elmer Hill. As a boy, I remember him. He was a politician, as I remember, as well as a farmer. He was instrumental in the procurement of the property for Hickory's Park.
Walt Bean was?
No,
Elmer Hill? Okay,
Which is quite a nice piece of property in there.
yeah. Mrs. Kopke taught school in the one-room schoolhouse, but nobody seemed to be able to confirm whether it was the Prospect Valley School or the school in Weltonville. Ethel Long was also a teacher, and again, you know, nobody could tell me where.
She taught at Weltonville.
At Weltonville. And then that would have meant that Mrs. Kopke taught at Prospect Valley, at the Prospect Valley School.
When I was,
No,
in-
what,
go ahead.
is it Pleasant Valley, Prospect Valley?
Pleasant Valley, I'm sorry, Pleasant Valley, yeah.
When I was in third grade, Ethel Long was my teacher in North Valley.
In Newark Valley though. Yeah, you didn't go to the one-room schoolhouse, it was closed.
Yeah, long gone.
Yeah, long gone. Jim Wilson owned what is now the Hellman Farm. It was a turkey farm. And Martin tore down all the barns except the one that is still there. Everything else he tore down. He didn't want the turkey barn, you know, the long, narrow, not very high barns. So he got rid of all of them.
Connie, just for your information, if I may add, I worked on that farm, and that long brooder coop, you raised young chickens, and then they made caponets of those. That's back when they put the pills in the back of the neck. That was one job that this old, or young fellow then did not do. because every now and then they'd hit the brain.
Yeah.
Marietta would pull the, they'd have chicken for dinner, and of course, I didn't partake in that either.
Marietta showed us.
But,
Yeah.
and he also sold hatching eggs. The double-decker building that
Yeah.
is tool storage now. A lot of bucks in that, there
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
That supported his Guernsey dairy.
My mother also worked for Jim Wilson before she was married. And I'll tell you where she lived, on up the road.
Further up the road? Okay. At one point, Herb Peretta, do any of you know Herb Peretta?
Yes.
Yeah, so you know that his disposition might be challenged sometimes.
Yes.
Herb Peretta farmed with, I just saw it here.
Martin Hellman.
Martin Hellman, yeah, because I was talking about Martin Hellman. In the 1950s, they farmed together, but that relationship didn't last very long.
But, you know, Herb might have been a little off sometimes, but he maintained a nice farm.
Yes,
Oh,
It was
yeah.
always clean.
And so was Martin Hellman's.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Just because they had a farm didn't mean they had to look nasty.
Mhm.
Our daughter and son-in-law worked for him. They worked their farm.
And now going all the way to the end of Back West Creek Road is Mert Ketchum. And I asked how long Mert Ketchum had lived there, and the answer I got was forever. But we gathered somewhere around 60 years. He's lived on that farm for about 60 years. And then right at the end of, pretty much the end of our fire district on, again, you're still on West Creek Road, all the way out near the county line, Paul Dalton, remember that name from the past, used to live way at the end, the north end of West Creek Road. He ran blue tip gas out of his house. There, the office was in his house, and the display, or the place where he had his supplies were in the building across the street, and that building still remains there. It has a big window in the front.
Dan King and his wife both graduated with me.
And he moved eventually to Newark Valley. Now, I think I've covered everything, except the Barrett Farm.
Yes.
Well, how did I miss the
remember
Barrett Farm? I remember, I didn't.
That's where my mother came from. Her uncle was Oliver Sines, who lived on the cross where the road goes between Back West Creek and West Creek.
Uh-huh.
He lived there. That was
Newark, or the
that
West
was-
Creek Crossroad.
That was Oliver Sines. He moved there. And then my mother's parents came and bought well, I don't know if they bought it, but they run the Burt Barrett Farm.
Yeah, and Barrett used to be spelled differently. We talked about the spelling of Steve's last name, and it used to be Barrott. And from what all the paperwork I found, he had a sawmill on the Back West Creek Road, and he also had a grist mill. But the grist mill was on West Creek behind Neil Courtwright's house. And when Tony took over, when Tony Barrett got the farm, it was 450 acres. And there was also an ice house. So his grandfather had the sawmill and the ice house on Back West Creek, and the grist mill over on West Creek behind Neil Courtwright's house. They stored ice, they had hay and straw to keep the ice cold, and they had sawdust. And then of course I told you that Gift Peter's barn burned in the 1953-54 timeframe. It was sad because he got his cows out, but the cows returned to the barn and they all died. Yeah,
Horrible fire.
yeah. It was before my time, but Mert Ketchum's barn burning was bad.
Yeah, but when the cows returned, it just,
You just couldn't stop them,
Yeah.
and yeah, they said that That it was a really, really sad thing to watch. Okay. I thought I had this all in such wonderful order.
You didn't number the pages.
Yes, I did. I numbered the things on the map and the things on my page, and I still get lost. One thing I have on Crane's Nest Park Settlement Road area, and that was that Walt Bish owned the land on Crane's Nest, and his daughter, Carlene, still lives on the Crane's Nest Road up in there, and, you know, she, well, as a side point, it doesn't make much difference to you, she married a Rummel boy, and she married him, he went to Vietnam, he was the only boy in our graduating class in '66 that did not come home from Vietnam, and she never remarried.
Didn't she just pass away not too awfully long ago?
Carlene?
I was thinking that, I heard she did.
Really?
I think
I don't.
That would be news to
This
me.
year.
It's not very long.
Yeah, this year, I think.
Okay, I will check that. But that's all I have on Crane's Nest Park Settlement area. I was intended to get over and talk to Kwiatkowski's, but that just didn't happen. Newman Road. Newman Road, I have down that Mary Edsel and her husband Charles Pete Edsel, they always called him Pete, not Charles. They bought their farm there at the end of Newman Road in 1957.
In the middle of it, not in the middle of it.
Is it about, well, I said the beginning, because she was one of the first houses on the left-hand side going up the
One of
road.
the first new houses.
First new house, yeah. They bought it in 1957, they owned 93 acres. And they sold off parts of the farm to their children as they became necessary for them to have homes of their own and whatever. They worked both, Mary drove school bus forever and ever, and Pete worked at the school as a mechanic in North Valley. And they produced maple syrup, because maple syrup was a big event in that time. And now Mary, of course, has sold the house and the business as such. Her son, Bob Olive, still does maple syrup on the farm there, and he still lives there.
We walked through that maple grove from school, cross lots. But the Henderson boy says, you can drink all the sap you want, but leave our syrup alone.
And then the Wilson farm was, well, at least when I talked to Sue Gray, who lives in the old Wilson house, she only bought part of the farm, and she bought that in 1987. She purchased 120 acres, and she still lives there on what used to be the Wilson farm. And the Wilsons sold, they built a house across the road. The Wilsons bought. No?
No, Mrs. Gray's home sits behind our home, the Newman house.
Okay, behind the Newman house.
My folks sold it to Wilson's in about 1945. Yeah, it had to be 45 because our kids were born over there. The home.
46.
Okay. And anyway, the Wilsons bought it, and they were starting to build this house which Mrs. Gray is in.
Oh, okay, it was the other way around, but she got the new house,
And
okay.
they were tying out fat. And that was supposedly why the house burned down.
Burned down, okay.
And I can remember my dad being so upset. He raised 9 of us kids
In
in no
that house,
accidents
yeah.
or anything. He
Yeah.
was so upset because that was his homestead.
And then they sold part of it to their son Ed.
Yeah.
Ed Wilson
Yeah.
lost his hand in an accident,
Yeah.
and he eventually moved to Seattle, Washington, which is where he still lives.
And their daughter still lives on part of the farm.
Correct.
Outside.
Bob Scharf's wife, Carmela? Carmela.
Camille.
Camille?
Mhm.
Okay. And Paul and Olive Barrett lived at the house on the end of the road, just before you go into state lands on Newman Road. and she lived there all her life, and they're related to the Barretts on Backwest Creek Road, although nobody seems to, distant
Very
relatives,
distant.
okay? So, I don't have anything else to offer unless somebody else has something to offer. Yes,
The dirt road that comes out of state land and goes down to the back road,
Jinksville Hill?
Jinksville Hill. I talked to an old lady that lives right on the corner there. I assume she's no longer there.
That would be Mrs.
Who would that be?
Palmer.
Palmer, Ruth Palmer. Ruth and Dwayne Palmer lived in a
Right
house
there.
right there. Right.
That kind of looks like a schoolhouse, but I assume it's not.
Oh, not that I know of.
No.
Dwayne and Ruth Palmer lived there for as long as I can remember.
Had a couple kids, couple boys,
Boy and a girl.
Boy and a girl,
boy and a girl.
yeah.
Yeah.
She was very friendly. I was over there.
Oh, yeah.
She's deceased now.
Yeah, they're both
She was
deceased,
a
yeah,
Gander girl,
yeah,
That's correct.
yeah.
What was her maiden name?
Walker,
Walker?
wasn't it?
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
Palmer Walker?
Frank Walker was her
She was very
father.
friendly to an old man stranger.
she lived there forever.
And now she lived alone for many years.
Many years, yes, she did.
And she went to a nursing home and now she is no longer with us.
That's correct.
Yeah, she couldn't stay alone anymore.
Her son has died, but her daughter's still alive.
I went there for a squad call when her husband at the age of, I'm gonna say 80, give or take, fell out of the tree because he was trimming branches.
Excellent.
I said to him, Dwayne, what are you, don't you know that this is a job for young men? I said, what are you doing up in the tree? He said, well, it had to be done.
That's right.
And I said, well, that was kind of foolish. He said, well, old men do foolish things too.
Now, she kept the place pretty neat and clean.
She did.
So how old was she?
She
Oh,
was in
she
her
was in her
90s when she
Yeah,
died.
she died, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when was she living
There?
there?
Oh,
Oh,
up until the
forever.
last couple, I bet
Couple
she
years?
wasn't in a nursing home 2 years. Yeah.
She was in a senior citizens complex there in North Valley for a while too.
Yeah,
But yeah.
Palmer.
Palmer.
Palmer and Walker.
Yeah, she was a walker.
Her husband would go in the woods, Dwayne, and pick Princess Pine and make Christmas wreaths, and he'd wear all brown deer season.
Nice going.
Yeah.
Well, I cut his wool,
You never got shot?
I cut his wool pants off him that day he fell out of the tree because his leg was hurt.
Yeah.
And she gave me holy what for? What did you do that for? And I said, well, we gotta take care of his leg. She said, well, don't throw them out because I will fix them. I'm sure she did.
Connie,
Yes,
now you've said where Newman Road is. Everybody wonders how I got to North Valley High School from Newman Road. Well, I was very upset over it at times,
Helicopter.
but in 1934, Hiram Nickerson came to, as school superintendent here in Canton. He came to my dad and says, will you send your daughters to North Valley School? We don't have room for them. My sister Gladys was going to be a freshman. I was going to be an 8th grader. We're 7 miles from Canton, 11 and 12 years old. And I've told you where the Newman house was.
right,
You've told me where the Burt Barrett house was.
right.
We walked from Newman Road through 3 farms to West Creek and got on the bus at Uncle Ollie's, I told you about. Or, when Dad wasn't using one of the horses, we took our horse and buggy and drove it to Weltonville
And left the horse there for the day.
and put it in Sherwood's barn.
Right,
Out back of the John's house, went over to the store. Of course, it was in Depression times. We
Right.
were poor.
Yeah,
And we were poor. And if Dad could spare 3 cents for each of us, we could have a banana off the string at Bodgett's store.
my kids thought they were, because my kids, when we moved on to Lower Fairfield, again, not a whole lot of people were there originally.
No.
And when the school bus came up through, they were the first ones on, and the bus made the loop up Lower Fairfield and then up Newman and down Fairfield
Yeah.
Road.
Yeah.
So they missed the bus. and thought I was gonna take them to school. I'm not that nice of a mother. I made them walk to the store to get on at the other end, and they thought that was terrible. They had to walk to the store?
Yeah.
Well, you know, if they had a quarter in their hand, they would have walked to the store.
Kids don't know how we got educated.
Yeah.
School was country school was 2.5 miles.
Mhm.
Our church was 2 miles. My dad always walked to Sunday school with his kids. And mother would come with a horse and sleighs or horse and Democrat wagon, whatever it was. Always have a big chicken dinner for after church.
Yep.
And I remember one time, my sister was a little bit, she didn't do what she was told most of the time, I'm sorry. And we couldn't have one of the work horses. So we took one that was kind of spirited. And mother says, do not take that lower road, Lower Fairfield. You know, the bridge by the church,
Oh, yeah.
it rattled.
Uh-huh.
Good for it.
Good floor in it, and she
Yes.
says, don't do that because old Hainer will scare it.
Right.
He did, and we flew to Weltonville, hoping that when we got down into the center of Weltonville, he'd slow down for the next bridge, and he did. Boy, we went. But mother says, don't take that lower road.
So of course you have to, right? Yes, sir.
Connie is a native and lifelong resident of West Creek. I'm very pleased you took the effort to put this show on, Connie.
Thank you. I'm sure there's still lots of information. Yes.
Jerry Holder,
You wrote over?
no. We're West Creek Hovers.
Who's West Creek?
Our,
What's her name?
Who's this?
Liz? Oh, yeah.
Mayless?
oh,
May Lisk and them?
oh
Yeah,
yes,
oh,
oh
Leslie
yes.
May.
Yeah.
They were good friends of my family.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Do
she's mine.
you have any idea how many working farms are in your fire district? That is dairy farms that are producing milk?
Gunther,
Arena.
Martin Hellman,
Spencer.
Spencer,
Not
Port
Ketchum's
Wrights
anymore.
aren't, Ketchum's are, yeah.
There's a new barn over there, relatively new, a great big thing.
Briggs.
Who's
That's
that?
Brinks.
Brink.
And they're not actually in our fire district because the way the creek runs, they run the, yes, exactly. So, but that's one. I think the correct answer is 3.
Is there Newman Road, is Newman Road in your district?
Yes,
I thought so.
yes,
The house where
Howland's.
John,
Oh, they're
That's
about,
beyond you.
yeah.
they're on Barden Road.
the house where John Buzzy Sherwood lives
Uh-huh.
was built by our great-grandfather as a wedding gift for his bride in the early 1800s, mid-1800s. And Shirley Sherwood Houston and my brother Buzz Sherwood were both born in that house.
I just don't hear of people being born at home anymore. Well, maybe with the medical physician redo and, change in the thing, maybe people will go back to being born at home. Midwives and, that kind of stuff.
My father and I and my daughter were all born in that.
Yeah.
My mother was midwife.
There was 2 one-room schools in this area.
Yes. Pleasant Valley and Weltonville, our old fire station, was a one-room schoolhouse. And I tried to get with the school to find out when they closed the one-room schoolhouses and consolidated, but I tell you.
I think North Valley centralized in mid-30s, 35, 36.
Well, yeah, she said
And that's when
that-
they closed the school.
That's when they closed the schools was, but,
Yeah, because my mom graduated in 36 from North Valley.
from North Valley.
Every little town had a one-room schoolhouse almost.
Yeah.
You know.
West Newark, Takesville.
Yeah, West Newark had a one-room schoolhouse.
About 2-3 miles between.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
We have a new park,
Yes, we have the
in
Scott
case
Community
everybody
Park.
doesn't know.
Yeah, we have the Scott Community Park, which is in the, Weltonville Fire Company owns the land on the corner of Bloor and West Creek Road, and we have a pavilion and a nice little park, picnic area back there that you can go and have a picnic or rent the park or whatever.
Is that where they're gonna build their new park?
That's where we're gonna build the new fire
I was wondering
station.
what was starting in there. so.
Yeah, if we We've gotten nothing but roadblocks. We haven't gotten a whole lot of help from anybody.
Why do you keep trying to build it underwater?
Don't even get me started.
It didn't flood like this spring.
I'm from Spencer originally, and I'm writing a book on the one-room schools in Spencer. Luckily, here in Tioga County, and no other county in the state, I don't think, we have the records of every individual one-room schools back to 1814.
Yeah,
Down in the
Down in
county
Waco.
historian's office,
Yeah.
you'll find the record of your school from the day it was built until the day it closed up.
You'll find it.
Okay. Yes,
I
ma'am.
grew up on Lower Fairfield
You did? At where?
At the, used to be a bridge cross between.
That's correct.
Right there. Up
Up
on
on
the
the
hill.
Okay.
Jan Decca's, bought the farm.
Jen Decca.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
It's Sabrix before that.
Well, on Lower Fairfield, that has just materialized, lots and
Yes.
lots of homes up there. Ours was, we put a trailer up there first, and took us about 4 years to get a house built. And by that time, there was a trailer in across the road, and then another one, and
They built up in a hurry.
John Murphy from Newark Valley and Zimmers. They had a working relationship, and John ended up owning a lot of the property that Zimmer owned because they didn't have money to pay him, so they bartered with land. Every time he did a job, he would get another piece of land off of Zimmer's on the Lower Fairfield Road. And my first husband, did work for John Murphy, and that's how we got the land by the barter system. We did pay some for it, but we didn't pay, for the first piece, we bought 2 pieces of property. One of them was done by sheer work, and the other one was,
Did he own the Graves and the Galpin farm that's back in?
yes. That's where Judy Lord lives now.
Is that where she is?
And next to her is Ralph Hocking, Sherry and Ralph Hocking, and we affectionately refer to him as the professor, because he's a professor at BU with photography. And he has a business in Owego over the Hand of Man, and does, picture, all kinds of, anything electronic and pictures and all that kind of stuff. And his place was owned by Carl Kurtz.
He was a stonemason.
He was a stonemason.
Yeah.
Right.
With several children.
Yeah.